And as I was on social media this week, I happened to see another one of these posts, these videos. And it was a gentleman who had been given permission to return to his house, destroyed by fire, to his property. And now just a pile of burnt rubble on the ground. But there in the remains of all that had been there before, he was recording a video to highlight a particular item, or more specifically, 200 particular items. His shoe collection that he had taken decades to collect and bring together. And as he walked through the charred remains of what was there, he was picking up burnt up shoe boxes. Shoes melted and burnt, some stuck together with other pairs in a large pile. There were custom Air Jordans and Kobe reverse Grinches and 2024 Nike Wizard of Oz themed shoes to highlight the release of the movie Wicked that had just come out. Thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars spent. Years searching for the perfect pairs, ruined in the wake of the flames that destroyed so much. Now, I'm not sure of this man's relationship with Jesus, and I'm not going to comment on that at all. The video was not him lamenting, but it was actually him highlighting the loss, showing those who over time had been following him on his social media accounts to see the newest pairs that he would bring home and add to the collection, the result of the fire on all he had worked so hard to accumulate. And as I watched, I couldn't help but be drawn to the words of Jesus found in the opening to our passage from this morning. Words found in Matthew chapter 6 as we continue in this sermon series, Lessons from the Mount, looking at the Sermon on the Mount. Words that I will paraphrase to say, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where fire and smoke destroy." Words that begin the next stage of a message we heard last week, as we discussed the idea of looking at the motives or checking our hearts. And this week, however, the attention is going to shift from the heart to another part of the body, to the eyes. And the importance for the believer, for the follower of Jesus, in following a three-step process to determine what their treasure is and where they were keeping it. To see if they had the right focus to be a part of the kingdom of God. And so the first was to determine where they were storing up, where they were accumulating, stockpiling their treasures and their resources. Where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. Now, these were specific examples of ways that Jesus chose to highlight the truth that earthly treasures do not last. Moth and rust was a reference to the high-quality fabrics that would come in from the east, that were seen as a status symbol to wear in their society, but would one day be nothing more than food for the insects. Thieves break in was a literal reference to the manner that this would happen, where thieves would break through the exterior walls of the homes to take the contents from within. These were actually ways they lost their things. And so Jesus was highlighting for them the absurdity of storing these things up. Now, this isn't to say that Jesus was telling them that there was something wrong with having earthly possessions. The issue for him was the level of importance that they would carry in the life of the believer. So have a car, a house, cash, bank account, work, positions at work, perhaps a couple nice pair of shoes. But when these things become where your sense of worth is, your sense of pride is, your sense of dependence is, Jesus says, then you are storing up treasures on earth, and so your heart is also there. When they become where your focus is, on getting more, saving more, spending more, storing up more in case, trusting in them over God, then you are storing up treasures in earth and not in heaven. When they help to bring you status, to identify the people you'll look up to, those who have more or are worth more, the level of influence you'll have on others based on the amount that's in your bank account, as we see evidence all around us in the world we live in, then you are storing up treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But when you're receiving them and using them with open hands and an open heart, Jesus says, now you're storing up treasures in heaven. When you're offering them back to God for his purpose, for his will to be done. He says you're storing up treasures in heaven, and there your heart is as well. And when you're willing to sacrifice, to sell, to live without in order to assist someone in need, to provide for those who are going without, then you are storing up for yourself treasures in heaven. Jesus begins our passage this morning by getting them to consider the question, what do you treasure? Now, for some in that day, and for perhaps some in ours as well, that might be one of these kind of easy questions. Of course, it's the heavenly treasures, because and you can fill in the blank. But how do we know this for sure? How do we test that or check that? And this is where Jesus brings in the second element of his teaching, turning the attention from the heart to what guides and focuses it, the eyes. The window to their souls, the lamp of the light of Jesus' righteousness for the believer's spirit. Jesus tells them, if you want to know where you're storing your treasures, get your eyes tested. Were they singularly focused? Did they have good sight? An eye that is reflecting the light of God into the world? A person like this would be generous with what they'd been given, would be merciful and meek, peacemakers, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, as we heard in our first message from Matthew 5, 1-12. They would be salty and stay lit, as we heard in the message from Matthew 5, 13-16. They would turn the other cheek and love not just their neighbor, but love their enemies, as well as Jesus continued in Matthew 5, 38-48. And they would care for others, be active in prayer, daily in his word, seeking the glory of his kingdom. Jesus was telling the people the focus of their eyes was the perfect way to check their hearts, as we heard last week from Matthew 6, 1-18. Or did they have eyes darkened and unable to reflect God's light in the same way because they were focused on worldly things? Or perhaps they were double focused, having poor eyesight, needing some spiritual bifocals to try to focus on what was in front of them, the earthly things, but to look to the future as well, trying to function in both worlds, believing in God, but not trusting him to provide and to care for them, offering part, but not the whole. As Al was sharing with us before, not all that I am, but part of all that I am. Something that, as I've shared with you before, that I did for 10 years after first hearing my call to officership, offering God a portion of my time, my talents, and my treasures, as long as he didn't make me go to training college. I looked healthy, but my vision was blurred between the will of God and my desire to be home and comfortable in Hamilton. I was willing to offer some of myself, but not all of myself. Were they saying they relied fully on God, but storing away treasures, resources, supplies here just in case something happened, in case he didn't show up in their hour of need? Were they finding their security in things instead of him? Were they like Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5, those who, after seeing others giving all they had, sold their land, and instead of offering everything, offered a portion of the proceeds, but claimed it was the whole thing? And then being confronted by Peter and sticking to their story, ultimately they die through their treachery. Now, I'm not saying if you don't give as you should, God is going to cause you to drop dead right here and right now. Saving is fine. Not giving what God requires is not. The process of spiritual death, then, is already occurring for us. So we need to look at how we're using our time, talents, and treasures in this world. And if the focus is on earthly things, there your heart will be also. There your home is also. But if our focus, if our eyes are on heavenly things, offering them to Jesus first, ourselves last and others in between, then the joy of the Lord will be ours, and our rewards will be found in our heavenly home as well. Jesus was saying to the people in this lesson to test their eyes to determine where their focus is in order to see what they treasured the most. Then lastly, they were to ask themselves one final question in order to see if they were living within his kingdom. Who are they serving? To ask them to look back and see where they spent their time, how they spent it, and for whom it was spent. Was it spent to build their kingdom, to serve their purposes, to gain more earthly possessions, power, prominence, prestige, for personal fulfillment? Or was it spent building a heavenly kingdom for God's will, in service to him? Were they fully devoted to following Jesus? Willing to go where he leads, even if it meant not having a fixed place to lay their heads, or a chance to be there for the important moments with family, as Jesus lays out for a gentleman in Matthew 8:18-22. Even if it means selling all their possessions and giving it to the poor, as he challenged the rich young man in Matthew 19. Even if it meant being willing to lay down their lives, as Jesus did for us, and so many of his first disciples would do in service to him and his kingdom later in their lives. Because Jesus leaves no doubt for us in this passage that there is no way to serve him and to serve money. But the truth is that last word could really be anything that you and I place in the spot that Jesus should occupy: money, or self, or relationships, or our spouse, or our kids, or our home, power, possessions, personal glory, publicity, jealousy, lust, greed, or whatever else they could or we can place in the proper position of our lives that God should hold. That to figure out what they treasure, they needed to look at where, how, and what they spent their time, offered their service to. That to be a follower of Jesus meant to do these things not just one time, not at conversion and then to never worry about it again, not just to do it on Sundays where you come here and listen to a message and think, are they talking to me? And then not to worry about it again as you go through Monday to Saturday, but to every day ask ourselves the questions. Take time to reflect on the person in the mirror, to put ourselves through the treasure test that Jesus has laid out for his people in this passage. Where are my treasures, your treasures, our treasures as a church family here being stored up? Are they things that rust, moths, fire, time, trends, technological upgrades, wear and tear can destroy or make obsolete? Are the things we value most things that when they die out, we throw away and replace? Or things that when we die, we won't be able to bring with us into the next life? Or are they things like the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Things that will cause ripples around the world, that will reach far more people than we'll ever know and last far longer than we'll ever live and echo into our eternity. To ask ourselves, what are you, am I, are we focused on? Are we singularly focused on having heavenly perspective, in seeing things his way, using them for his purpose and focusing on his leading in our lives? Or heaven forbid is that singular focus on earthly things, where the heavenly has become blurry and dark in comparison? Or are we in need of those spiritual bifocals, trying to focus on the short term while also trying to see the long-term heavenly things as well, struggling to make it work when we know where our focus needs to be? And finally, who are you? Who am I? Who are we serving? Ourselves? This life? A statistics program? The Shield? A bank account, our kids, our parents, the world? Or are we serving God and living for his will? Serving others and seeking their benefit? Serving ourselves last and trusting in him for his provisions and protection? And that if we can answer where, what, and who with Jesus, that friends, we will find ourselves perfectly within his will. constantly seeking his kingdom, daily receiving earthly blessings, but most importantly, storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven.